Welcome back, everyone, to Enterprise Security Weekly. This is Paul, and I'm on the line still with Don Pizzette from IT Pro TV. We're going to talk about the enterprise security news for this week. And I'm actually going to start from the bottom of our stories list here, but ransomware effect on the small business. You know, we talk a lot about the enterprise business here on the show. But one of the things I've learned from doing Startup Security Weekly in this show this year is that what we'd call small business isn't necessarily a small business. In fact, there are probably many of the same IT folks, unless you're the IT person, right, for your organization, that are listening to the show. Because, I mean, in your mind, it is an enterprise security, right? But it's in terms of other ways to measure it, it might be a small business. And the effects of ransomware on these types of companies are very chilling, actually. And the security, I think, overall, what I'll call like the mid-market, maybe. I mean, some people call it, I don't know, some people say small business is smaller and then mid-market's a little larger and then we have enterprise, right? But in the smaller companies, I think we have a bigger security problem. Ransomware can hit them hard, but I think it's a market opportunity and certainly an opportunity for all of us for educational purposes. But it's a market opportunity to apply security, and it has to be done differently because things like ransomware are going to hit small business. And what do we do about that?
Yeah, you know, in the last 2 months, I've helped two companies that got hit by ransomware, and one was a massive organization with over 100,000 employees, just a huge organization, and then the other one was what I would consider a small business, but it was actually a school not too far from here, where they got hit with ransomware, and they have 2 IT people. 1,000 users, but only 2 IT people. So obviously, you're not seeing a huge investment in that IT infrastructure. And when they get hit and the attackers say, hey, give us 4 Bitcoin and we'll unencrypt everything. Well, what are they going to do? They're going to go and Google the conversion rate. 4 Bitcoin is, I don't know, $3,500 or something.
I was going to say it's in the couple $1,000s or something like that.
Yeah. So if it's $3,000 or $4,000 and they'll put everything back, you just pay it, right? And that's what they do.
Until they encrypt everything again and demand another $4,000 or whatever.
That's absolutely true. And that's why ransomware is becoming so prevalent, because it works, it makes money. If you think about like the people that released the Code Red virus or I mean, you remember all the big ones we always heard, the Anna Kournikova or I Love You or all those viruses. How much money did they make?
Right.
They didn't make anything.
And you're right, Don. 4 Bitcoin, according to Google today, is $3,113.
That's pretty close. And for being fake money, it's worth quite a lot.
Yeah. It's digital currency. Come on now. It's not really fake. So, I guess in a way it is.
I mean, these people, they charge just enough to where it's not outrageous, and you're not going to reach out and call. I'm not going to call the authorities in because people feel guilty, like, hey, I should have been securing my network and I wasn't. This is my fault. And if the feds come in and investigate, they're going to dig through everything and it's going to be my fault. And so they just pay it. Well, you can take steps, even as a small business, to help prevent that type of thing and make sure it doesn't happen to you. Small businesses, it's easier for them to get their stuff into the cloud and in reliable areas where it's easy to roll back and harder to touch. But when they're supporting their own servers, they're not following proper security practices, and it's only a matter of time before they get hit by something like this.
Mm-hmm. The next 2 stories tie into each other very much so, and it kind of ties into some of our cloud discussions earlier. Cloud identity and access management market is reported to reach $5.32 billion into 2022. And I think it's one of the things, I don't like doing the recap shows or what I learned this year kind of thing, right? Or predictions of what's coming next year. But given the current landscape today, I think that identity and access management is going to make a resurgence. And it's kind of interesting. We've talked about how it's kind of a throwback to mainframes where you had role-based access control, and that was your security. We've realized 20, 30 years later that, hey, that applies today, very much so. It certainly applies to the cloud, even more so. And this is something we should all be implementing. My fear is that it falls into like this category of projects, kind of like NAC or Network Admission Control, that's really hard. But once you do it, you get a really big benefit. But to implement it, it's really hard and it's really expensive. And that's kind of my fear. I don't know what your thoughts are, Don, about kind of security moving into embracing both privileged identity management and identity and access management.
So IAM can be really expensive to implement depending on how you go about it. Getting it integrated into all of your different systems. There's free solutions out there like Shibboleth and those, but even them, by the time you're...
Don, funny story. I know the guy that created Shibboleth.
Oh, really?
I worked in the two cubicles down from him when I worked at university. He's an awesome guy. We've had him on the show. He's a super, super nice guy. Yeah.
Well, tell him in the next version to pick an easier name to say.
Yeah. I forgot where he came up with the name. I think it's like a dog or something, because he was coming up. I was helping him trying to come up with a logo for Shibboleth. His name's Steve Carmody. He's super smart, super nice guy. Yeah. Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
So products like that, I mean, that's free, right?
Yeah. But
just the implementation of getting everything tied into it and the support costs for it. And if you do it wrong, authentication is not where you want to do it wrong, right? If somebody compromises my printer, that's not such a big deal. But if they compromise my identity management, all your security goes right out the window.
Well, so and Steve was working on really hard problems like federated identity management and also academic identity management, I guess you would call it, so that universities that do collaborative projects together would recognize each other's credentials on each other's campuses. So if let's say I was doing research for Brown University, is actually where I used to work, right? And I went to a partner school, let's say Harvard or whatever, and I would have some level of, it would recognize my access in some way and grant me access to, let's say, the wireless network or certain projects that I was collaborating on. So that in and of itself was a really cool concept. It's really difficult to pull off, but it's a cool concept.
Yeah, and that's where we're starting to see people pushing it off on someone else, right? So IAM was always the realm of enterprises. They were the only ones who could afford it, and in large universities, that's how it worked. But now you go to Bob's website and it's got log in with Google or log in with Twitter, and it's saying, hey, I can't do IAM, but let's let these other people do it, and we'll tack onto it. And that's okay, but if that one account gets compromised, everywhere you logged in with it's like a house of cards, right? So it's got to be done right, which OAuth 2 tries to do.
I think the plus side to that, Don, is if I can recognize that an account has been compromised or misused in some way, when I turn that off, it also turns off their access to everything else, which could be a benefit in organizations.
Yeah, the single sign-on methodology, too. The idea that you've only got one password to remember, as opposed to if somebody has 500 passwords to remember, they start picking simple ones or they start writing them on paper. So that tries to simplify it a bit there. I think ultimately we're going to see this bigger move. We already see two-factor authentication really kicking in. But things like the YubiKeys keys or some physical item that you have to authenticate with, you've heard several tech CEOs saying we're moving away from passwords, right? I think it was it Larry Page at Google? It was one of the Google guys who said we're going to get people away from passwords. That you've got to have something that's handling that authentication and tying it all together and making it meaningful. And that's why the IAM market is blowing up, especially in the cloud. And I mean, 5.3 billion, that's a good chunk of change.
Right. It's probably a pretty modest estimate from what I've observed in the market this year. Speaking of moving to the cloud, Barracuda is offering a next-generation firewall for the Google Cloud Platform, which I see Google's cloud platform growing. I think that Google and Microsoft have a lot of catching up to do to Amazon. I still see Amazon as the market leader. It's going to be really hard to displace Amazon as the market leader for cloud services, either virtual cloud platforms, infrastructure in the cloud, or providing applications or storage in the cloud. I mean, Amazon is just hands down the winner right now. I don't see that changing anytime soon. I do see more security vendors like Barracuda, of course, offering their services in the cloud. We saw a lot of that this year. We still continue to see that, especially with Amazon's reInvent. Was it reInvent? Is there a cloud conference?
Yeah, it just happened.
Yeah, it's like the announcements coming out of reInvent were like, everyone's offering their services in the cloud. And since we follow all the security companies, like every security company had to have some announcement that they were doing some kind of security component in the cloud. And this is no except now Barracuda has probably waited until the reInvent kind of slowed down and said, oh, yeah, we're supporting Google's cloud as well, which I think is important to support multiple cloud vendors and give people the option. But I mean, this is where your security technologies have to live if you're going to go into the cloud. And we're certainly seeing a trend, which gives me hope for the movement into the cloud, because when we talk about, to go back to where we started in the stories, is small businesses and being able to do security efficiently, I think that they're the ones that need to be in the cloud more than anyone else.
Absolutely. And most of them started with the on-premises, the private clouds, where, Barracuda, I used to tell people, like, I love everything about Barracuda except their hardware. Their hardware's garbage. And then one day they came out and they said, hey, we're releasing our new virtual firewall. You can run it right inside of VMware. Here's the VM. And the hardware went away. And I was like, that's right. Perfect. Cisco did the same thing. They have their VASA that you could run it on VMware, but now they've ported that up. It's in Amazon Web Services. I'm not sure if it's in Google Cloud Platform or not. But, people look at I think I mentioned it in the first segment, where if you deploy in AWS, they have security groups. They have these like software firewalls that are basically IP tables, and that's it.
We've used them before. They work pretty good. I'm not sure how easy or difficult on a relative scale they are to manage from other firewall or like access control lists.
And that's really it, right? You don't get centralized management on any scale. You don't get reporting. You don't get deep packet inspection and threat analysis, all the big buzzwords that are going around right now. If you deploy something like the Barracuda virtual solution or Cisco or whatever, it costs you more money, but you get all those other features, and it's a virtual machine that you control, not that you're having to trust a cloud vendor on. So there's a lot of value there.
Let's see. Ixia enhances blah, blah, blah. So basically Wi-Fi capabilities, which is kind of interesting. It ties into an interesting conversation I had yesterday with a sponsor of our other show, Pony Express. So this is interesting. Now, I want to get your take on this, because I talked about it at length with Pony Express yesterday. Essentially, they've got a team or work in conjunction with penetration testers who say it's still easy today to social engineer your way into an organization, get access to a machine, plug in a USB dongle, or get access to the network and plug a Wi-Fi device in and go undetected. Now, this is stuff we were doing 10 plus years ago with great success that is still widely successful today. And I like to see solutions for this, but I think they also fall into the category of really hard to implement and maintain so far.
I'm glad you mentioned Pony Express, because I had a chance to interview them back at RSA, and they had this neat demonstration where they started out with the little Pwn plug, right? The little device, you'd sneak into somebody's office, you'd plug it in and just walk away, and it would start harvesting data.
Yeah, it was actually my good friend Dave started out, and I remember talking with him. He's like, I used to work for a company, and I had to travel all over the place to do pen tests, so I came with this little box, and now, like, lo and behold, 10 years later or whatever, they've got Pwn Pulse, which is a full cloud platform where they can monitor remote offices for people. They can actually detect karma attacks happening on your Wi-Fi network and report that up to a central cloud. I mean, that's a huge step from where Dave was, just trying to solve his problem. So.
Absolutely. So it's turned into a full commercial product. And now if somebody sneaks into your building and sticks a box on the wall that's got its own Wi-Fi harvester or whatever, you see that new ID pop up and you get a warning, and you can even map it out, like where it physically is if you've got enough of the plugs spread about. It gives you that extra layer of security. They showed where they could do cellular networks too, even detecting things like unauthorized cell towers, which might be a stingray by the government, but it could also be attackers doing things like intercepting cell signals, Bluetooth, right?
They do
blue
Bluetooth,
snarfing and all that. Those are all attack vectors that a lot of people just ignore, and they can find that. It's really important to monitor Wi-Fi. So Ixia, it makes sense that they would kind of deploy that in their solution too to cover that extra.
So they say Ixia's Hawkeye, which proactively generates and analyzes synthetic network and application traffic to assess how applications and services will perform, now includes proactive monitoring of Wi-Fi readiness. I don't know what that means, but it maybe sounds cool. And that's the challenge that we have. The benefit we've had with Pony Express is we can sit with them and talk with them about and see a demo of how their solution works. In all fairness to Ixia, we're reading like their press releases, trying to figure out how it works, which is met with mixed success, mostly failure of understanding exactly what it does. But we encourage folks who are either users of the product or representatives or people working for any vendor that we talk about to reach out to us. We're more than happy to learn about your solution. Now, we can't sit with every vendor every day, all day long, but we do pledge to learn as much as we can from those willing to share. What else do we have? IoT security. So I haven't read this market guide to IoT security, but what do you tell organizations that are looking to procure IoT devices? I mean, it's such a broad spectrum. I think that there are advances happening by certain vendors, and there are small wins, like HP has vowed to turn off FTP and Telnet on their printers and stuff like that. But I still think this is going to be a huge problem, and I don't know that there's much today we can do with IoT security, or is there?
Well, you've got to control it, and that's the real challenge, right? The biggest example I give is the Raspberry Pi. I love the Raspberry Pi. It's a great project device. I've probably got 3 of them here in my office, and use them for all sorts of different things. Well, if you get one and you put the Noobs or Raspbian on there, the 2 officially supported images, both of them have extremely insecure default configurations, right? They all have default usernames for the root account and stuff, so that they're very insecure. And so the temptation is to sit down and I'm going to harden this device. It is Linux, so I can get in there and lock it down. But then every tutorial you read, every project that you go, step 1, install this version of Raspbian, and you reset it, and now it's back to being insecure again. So as a company, what we have to do is be very, very strict about the devices we allow on the network. And you mentioned Cisco NAC, right, or just network access control in general. It doesn't have to be Cisco's, where we control, maybe it's 802.1x certificate authentication, where every switch port and every wireless connection in my environment, you've got to have a valid certificate before you're allowed on the network. And so if somebody brings one of these Internet of Things devices into the office, a stupid Wi-Fi scale or whatever, that it's not allowed to talk unless we approve it. You've got to at least go through some kind of vetting before these devices come in. And the most dangerous ones are those Wi-Fi web cameras that are all over the place from tons of vendors that they're just developed as rapidly as possible and sold as cheap as possible. So they're insecure. They've got exploits, and they communicate back out. So they're very easy to take advantage of, which is where we're seeing a lot of these new DOS attacks coming from.
It's interesting being able to catalog and fingerprint all these devices and detect them on your network. I don't know of any single vendor that could do that for even the majority of devices out there today, or even focused on that. And I think it's almost an impossible problem to solve, right? Because you never know what device is going to have what configuration or what fingerprint and impose what risk. So I think it's going to be a continuing problem of differentiating these devices on your network from even supported IoT, like a printer. Like, I have to allow printers on my network, but I don't want to allow webcams. So, like, making that distinction is going to be extreme. And you can't just say, well, if it's not running Windows, I mean, some of the devices are embedded Windows, and most of them are embedded Linux, so you can't just operating system fingerprint. I think that's going to be a really hard problem to solve.
And it's going to come down to people choosing between the convenience of the end user and security, and they almost always choose convenience of the end user, which is why we don't have a lot of the security controls that we want or that we know we need and that we can't put in there. It's why half the companies out there, people are full administrators on their own computer, or they have root access on their own computer, and they don't necessarily need it. So with IoT, I kind of treat it like applications. There's products out there like Cylance where they work on application whitelists. Like, no app can run except the ones we whitelist, because you can't blacklist the bad apps. There's too many bad ones out there, right? So you have to whitelist the good ones. That with IoT, you really have to treat it that way and say, I'm going to whitelist, I'm going to approve devices, and maybe on a one-by-one basis, which is going to take more staff, it's going to take more time, it's going to be more inconvenient, but you'll protect your network. And if you don't do that, you'll have rogue access points, you'll have compromised devices that come into your network behind your firewall, And at that point, you're just inviting people in to poke around on your network and see what they can get at. So it is a tough one. I know Bruce Schneier and a few other people have really been pushing for government regulation. Like, hey, let's get the government involved.
They're not going to get it.
I don't think that's going to get anywhere. I don't think that's effective. But the idea would be like setting a base level of standards for security. But we don't have that with desktop operating systems, so I don't think that's going to happen on IoT.
Yeah, well, for a lot of reasons that's not going to happen. Unfortunately, I think it would help to fix the problem if we did have some way to enforce standards. But the problem is a lot of these devices and firmware are made outside the U.S., so enforcing the import, it gets ugly. We've explored that topic on Security Weekly, so it's unfortunate. Do we want to talk about cyber insurance? I had a story. I don't know. I don't know how you feel about that, cyber insurance.
So cyber insurance is like giving up, right? It's like saying, I can't prevent this, so I'm just going to make it so it doesn't hurt so bad when it does happen. It is being proactive in a way. You're planning for your failure, but you're not really doing anything to stop it. It's like car insurance. I can't control every other driver on the street, so I have car insurance. So when I get hit, it won't be so bad. It'll be covered. So cyber insurance does absolutely nothing to improve your security, but it limits your liability from a financial side. And some of the policies even have like huge PR funds built into them where you can start a brand rebuild afterwards, just saying like, hey, I got breached and we're still a good company. You still want to do business with us, right? And somebody's got to pay for that PR.
I think it's interesting, and the analogy of the cars is kind of interesting. I think if the cyber insurance forces people to do the right things to improve security so that they get more of a discount on their cyber insurance, that could be a positive effect. I mean, and some of it, we talked about regulations. When I get into my car, it's a state law. I have to put my seatbelt on. So there's your regulations, right? But then it's not a state law that I have to park my car in a garage, but I might get a break in my car insurance if my car is parked in a garage every night. So, and that's a huge thing for security, right? I mean, just in my neighborhood alone, every year or other year, kids go through the neighborhood, and every car that's unlocked, they take anything that's valuable, and they put it all in a backpack, and then a car picks them up at the end of the neighborhood, and they go on to the next one. I mean, that happens, but they skip houses that have a garage, because they don't want to get caught. It's too much headache for them. And they skip cars that are locked or have an alarm. So I think it could have a positive effect. I think you're right, though. If you look at it as, well, I have insurance, so I don't have to do anything, that's bad. The last story that I had here was 5 unusual questions that have been asked by the board member. And I don't think these are necessarily unusual. I think it speaks to the level of what the board members kind of think about security, and this isn't a representative of every board, certainly not every company in the world. But, they ask questions like, my kid's school published a policy requiring personal passwords are only to be shared when needed. Do they have that right? What's the best password manager to use? How do I know if it's safe to click on a link in an email? And really basic security for individual type questions, which greatly concerns me.
It is, but it also shows how we aren't doing a great job educating the end user that it doesn't matter if you are the leading authority in cybersecurity. If you work at a company of 1,000 people, at least 900 of them are going to be just completely inept at IT security. They don't know. And we've got to have training programs for them. We've got to be able to reach out to those people that barely know how to use a mouse and explain to them in terms that make sense how to handle things securely. There's a lot of people out there that say password managers are bad. Why would I put all my passwords in one place? And they don't understand how things get encrypted and stored and whether that's secure. And they need to understand the risks and how that works. And sharing passwords, if they don't know, they're going to make decisions based on lack of information, which is almost always incorrect.
I'm a huge fan of LastPass, and I'll take the security risks that go along with it. Now, I don't put every single password in LastPass, right? There are certain ones which you leave out that you deem as just so high risk, but that really means I got to remember maybe 3 for me it's a lot more, but let's just say an average user, you put all your 75 passwords in there for all your websites and stuff. And the ones you don't put in there are like The ones that you use to manage your cloud services for all of your servers, that's probably bad, and you put two-factor authentication on that. Maybe your Google account, I don't put that in there because that's more than just my email, right? That's Google Drive and everything, and that's two-factor authentication. And any site that I use to register my domains. That doesn't go in there, and that gets two-factor authentication. So I identify at least 3 at the top of my head, which are those are way too high security. Those are outside of my password manager, and if available, I enable two-factor authentication on those. Everything else pretty much goes in my password manager.
On the domain side, boy, it is really hard to get a domain back once you've lost it. But two-factor makes a big difference because now, all right, maybe you have all your passwords in LastPass. And if it were to somehow be compromised, which they had that one weird incident where they weren't.
Yep.
But let's just say they were compromised. Somebody might have your passwords and they wouldn't have the two-factor side. They wouldn't have your tokenization system. So that insulates you from it and makes it a lot less risky. But there's risk in any system until we come up with some other solution. I worry about the push for biometrics, because we're seeing where people do fingerprint or whatever, and then the fingerprints. Remember what was the government agency? I got GSA stuck in my head, and that's not right. The Office for whatever, where they got compromised, and people's fingerprint cards got sent out. Mm-hmm. So now you can't say, oh well, I'll just go change my fingerprints. Right. So it is tough, but most people don't even know about that. All right, well, my fingerprints are out there. What does that mean? What can somebody do with that? So I think having a good education in place, some kind of simple training program, and there's a few organizations doing that. CompTIA just released the Cyber Secure, which is a very short training program that's designed for the regular person. I think they charge $25 for it or something like that. So for a large company, for a small company, very easy to put people through that. And you don't need to be an IT expert, but you need to know these basic things to make sure that you don't make a dumb mistake. And now we've got ransomware spread across the system.
Right. Yeah, I think fingerprint especially is good in certain circumstances. By itself, I don't think it's very good. On your phone, it's really just stored as a hash that if you know forensics of any kind on a mobile device, you can just go get. But what I use it for is LastPass on my phone. In order to unlock it, I have to know my password, but it also has to read my fingerprint. So it kind of serves as a two-factor to get into my LastPass, which makes me feel a little safer. Now, granted, if someone wanted to try and do forensics on my phone, they probably could replay the hash that represents my fingerprint, but whatever.
Yeah, there does come a limit where you've done everything you can do, and hackers by nature are very creative and coming up with new ways. So,
right. Plus I encrypt my phone too for whatever that's worth. I mean, there are certainly ways around that as well. But actually, Google, the Nexus 6P I have is encrypted by default, so that helps.
Yeah, and there's trust there that you trust those systems are implementing and storing those keys securely. Mm-hmm. On desktops we have trusted platform modules, and are those being where they actually manage your keys securely. But the only real solution is not to use any electronic device. You could join an Amish community, and it's very effective.
Very effective. I like that as our closing note. Don Pizzette from IT Pro TV, thank you very much for appearing on this edition of Enterprise Security Weekly. Thanks everyone for listening and watching. We'll see everyone probably not for a while. Oh no, we will see everyone next week. This is Thursday. We're going to do one more this year. So next week will be the last episode for Enterprise Security Weekly this year. And we'll start up in 2017. Thanks everyone.